Hello and welcome everyone to another episode in our DNA company webinar series. And you know, when it comes to kids, every child is so beautifully different, unique, energetic, chaotic. They are these precious little bundles that have been handed over to us in whatever way that they came into our lives. But we weren't given an owner's manual. We weren't told exactly how we're supposed to raise these precious little bundles in the best way possible, and how to do it the right way, and how to be the best perfect parent. Or did we? The way that they think, feel, learn, respond to the world around them, it isn't random. It's actually a reflection of their biology. And when we understand that biology, parenting becomes less confusing and far more empowering, especially when we have knowledge of that guide, of that blueprint, of that owner's manual. It really gives us insight into how every child is wired differently, and genetics helps us understand that. It helps us to understand how your child, my child, all of our children are unique and what makes them thrive. My name is Dr. Lara Varden. I'm Dean of the DNA University and an in-house clinician here at the DNA Company. And I have the pleasure of co-hosting tonight's webinar with my great friend and colleague and a brilliant practitioner himself, Justin Harris. Hello and good evening. How are you today?
I'm good. Good evening, Dr. Laura. Good evening, absolutely everybody here. There's a term in medicine that represents a time frame when I like to see clients, and it's called subclinical, right, or preclinical, and it really just means that we got there prior to a disease state showing up. And so, having healthy decisions in childhood is as subclinical as it gets because they're kids, right? So the best thing that you can do as a parent is to establish a nurturing and really high quality epigenetic environment, because that will help create the best methylation patterns early on in their lives and really just set them up for success. We want them to be disease free. We want them to not be reliant on medications if possible, and ultimately to grow into balanced and functional adults. I think genetic insights can really act as kind of a guiding lighthouse for how we can pull this off as parents. And there's really no greater job that you can possibly do than that. So I'm excited to dive into this topic with everybody. And Dr. Laura and I both know a little something about it. So I hope you guys learned something tonight.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that we now know that 40 to 60% of the differences in children's emotional and behavioral patterns are influenced by genetics, meaning that kids don't start on the same playing field. They really each arrive with such a different blueprint. And thankfully, like I said, one that we can finally read, one that can give us some insights into that owner's manual on let's do more than just keep them alive. Let's help to let them thrive.
Absolutely, and have a good quality lifespan and health span while they're at it. We do have a poll that we asked you guys a few questions. Vanny in the background, if you have a moment to pull that up for us tonight. Thank you. Okay, so we asked you guys a few questions just to kind of get a better understanding of what you're doing here. So the first question that we asked is, what's the main reason why you're joining this webinar? And pretty even split. About 20% of you said to better understand my child's behavior as well as emotions. And we're going to dive into the cognition genes and those ones that are really related to executive function and kind of how they turn up. So there's definitely going to be a lot of discussion on that tonight. The biggest one, though, 51% said to learn how genetics influence kids. right? So different things about diet, detox, how the child's body is actually working, and then how you can utilize that information to set them up best for success. 11% said to get practical parenting strategies, and we'll definitely dive into some of those as well. Dr. Laura is a fantastic mother and grandmother, so she knows lots of stuff about that. And 17% said just general curiosity, learning, understanding how the genomic aspect can be integrated. The second question that we asked is, which area do you find most challenging with your child? And 46% said emotions and big reactions. That's definitely ever relevant here. Pretty even split among the rest. 17% said focus, motivation, learning. Just 3% said sleep or routines. 11% said eating patterns or appetite. And then the other 23% are not quite sure. And you'll learn a little bit about each and every category tonight. The third question, have you ever noticed that one of your children responds differently than the other? And 71% said yes, completely different. And that is not surprising because even among siblings, the genes that we look at can be completely different. Like I've had my sister's genes done, and so many of them are way different than my genes. So even within one familial unit, you guys can land with a lot of different genotypes. I mean, you're going to look the same, right? So there's familial genetics on that realm, but the ones we're going to talk about are the ones that really separate people. And there's a lot of differences person by person, even within the same family. 17% said yes, somewhat. 0% actually said no, they're similar. So there you go, genetic variation. And 11% said not quite sure on that one. The fourth question is, how familiar are you with using genetic insights to support your kids? And only 3% said very familiar. So I'm hoping that that number goes up by the end of tonight. 46% said somewhat familiar. 26 and 26 for I've heard it, but don't know very much. And then the other 26 has said this is totally new to you. So welcome to the webinar. You'll learn a lot tonight. The very last question that we asked is, if you could understand one thing about your child's wiring, what would it be? And 29% said their emotions, so really looking to get into those executive function genes that we'll be diving into. 26% said their learning style. 31% said their stress response. That's a very important one. As a boy growing up in the 90s, I will say going to school was like a damn gladiator arena half the time. So there's definitely it's all context, but within their little worlds, kids are exposed to more stress than we would like to think. Right. So it's very important, that stress response and how we mitigate issues there. 11% said that their appetite and metabolism is important to you guys. So we'll talk about some of the dietary genes as well. And then that same 3% talked about sleep patterns. So there is a few genes that we'll dive into with regard to that. All right, Dr. Laura, I think that we know what we're up against tonight.
Absolutely. And, you may be wondering, I mean, you may have your own ideas on why this webinar matters, but kids, there are so many labels today that they're sensitive, they're difficult, they're stubborn, they're hyper, or they're all the above, and in reality, they're just expressing the way that their genes guide their brains, their hormones, their sleep, their stress system, some of the things that people are interested to know about. And the nice thing is that our DNA 360 actually lets us identify what a child needs, where they could be headed to head off, that subclinical, like Justin was talking about, to head off any future issues, instead of trying to change who they are, to support where they may be weak, to lean into where they're strong, and set up an environment that makes them thrive. So, with parents, when you work with a child's biology, children become healthier, more confident, more fulfilled. Now, is diet, nutrition, is that the end all, making sure they get good sleep? No, but that is going to be a major contributor to have them be stronger and healthier and be more resilient, especially when they come into stressful situations in school. Because I grew up in the 70s in school, and I'll tell you, it's the situations that you come up against are very similar. It's just nuances are different. But kids always need to deal with the stresses, and that's having a good foundation and understanding their biology really helps to support that and to make your life a little bit easier so you don't get great as quickly or pulling out your hair when they're just like create chaos. So let's jump in by exploring what genetics actually tells us about our children's health and why certain kids thrive under certain conditions while others struggle, and how we can help them to thrive as well. So, Justin, I'm going to hand the baton over to you to pick the first area that you would like to cover and some of the genes, and we'll go back and forth. Oh, before we do, I want to make sure we dropped it in the chat, but we are running a 20% off discount, a sale right now for our DNA 360 test and reports. And it includes a clinical navigation call. All you have to do is use Healthy Kids, that code Healthy Kids, to get that 20% off. And this is going to be good until December 19th. So great Christmas present, great gift. But gratefully, you will have a little insight with a clinician to help you understand those genes, to be able to talk about what we're going to be talking about tonight, but specifically for your child.
All right, so let's dive in a little bit here then. So, I think a good place to start would be within the mood regulation category. When we're talking about these executive function genes, there's a lot to say about stress response and how the child is metabolizing certain neurotransmitters, right? So within the mood and behavior category, there's a few moving parts that we look at. We look at things like dopamine, we look at things like serotonin, we look at things like noradrenaline, as well as BDNF. Each and every one of these is going to be very relevant for your child's behavior and how they manage things like dopamine response. So drivers, right? Like I think kids today have a lot more dopamine binging opportunities than they may have in the past, screens and all these kinds of things. Serotonin is a really interesting one as well. And serotonin is a master regulator of mood, right? So it's a little bit different than the dopamine pathway in that serotonin kind of operates on this revolving door, right? So there's a release of serotonin and then there's a reuptake of the serotonin, and it just kind of goes around and around like that. So we look at a very important receptor called 5-HTT-LPR, and we actually measure it a little differently. So this isn't a SNP. It's effectively being measured by the length of it. You can have a longer or a shorter receptor site for serotonin, and that's going to really translate to how much overall serotonin availability there is. But then it also is going to translate into that half-life, right? So just the amount of time that serotonin is available as well. If you have any dysregulation there, which would mean there is an S within the 5-HTT-LPR, you can have an LL, which is long. You can have an LS, which is shorter. And then you can have the SS, which would be the shortest receptor site. If you have an S in there, that means that you have the shorter receptor, which is going to mean there's less availability of that serotonin. And when they get serotonin, it's also not available for as long. There's a really interesting thing that we've observed with serotonin. I call it zooming in versus zooming out, right? And when you're dysregulated there, you have this tendency to really zoom in on stuff, right? So this shows up in relationships with their parents or their friends. You can hyperfixate on things if you're dysregulated for serotonin. It can be annoying traits of somebody else. If you're dysregulated for serotonin, you're going to notice that a heck of a lot more. And it can really contribute to things like irritability, right? Just mood swings, mood disorders. That's dysregulation of serotonin. I like to use the term seeing the forest from the trees. If you're dysregulated and you've got this beautiful forest in front of you, you may zoom in to a point where you just notice one gross looking insect on one tree. And it's very easy at that point to say, well, this forest is ugly, right? Because you're just zoomed in on that one insect. If you zoom out, you realize that the forest itself is absolutely beautiful. And that's what people with the longer receptor site tend to notice. The odd superpower that comes with it is that serotonin dysregulation, because of that zooming in effect, can actually make you pretty good with attention to detail. Like that hyper noticing of stuff can have some benefits. We see kids coming to us with the shorter receptor sites who are actually pretty good with stuff that requires that attention to detail. But remember that there's also an irritability factor that comes right alongside it. There's a second mover here, by the way, genetically called TPH2. And that's a gene that really helps contribute to the creation of serotonin. So if you have like a GT genotype, say for TPH2, you're also not going to be creating as much serotonin in the first place. So we like to bounce those two genes off of one another. If we have a shorter serotonin receptor and a suboptimal TPH2, it's going to translate as a lot less serotonin availability for the child. Now, we would be remiss not to mention a lot of serotonin is also made in the gut. So any child that has gut dysregulation, leaky gut, issues in the gut, that can also translate to less serotonin availability. So be aware of that. You want to make sure that you're also supporting their sleep, right? Because sleep has this thing about melatonin and serotonin and cortisol, and it's really a primary regulator of the serotonin cycle. So if you also have a kid who isn't sleeping very well, then you're going to want to pay attention to these genes, because it's like, because they notice things so well, their brain is hyper perceptive. And if you're trying to sleep and your brain is hyper perceptive, it's going to make it so that any little light bleeding in through the window, your kid's going to notice it. Or if you're cooking late at night, the smell creeps into their bedroom, their brain is going to notice it. And it's going to basically use it as a reason not to stay asleep or not to get into those deeper levels of sleep. So serotonin is very important. There's some great precursors that we can provide with tryptophan and 5-HTP, things like that. But keeping the sleep and keeping the gut health ideal is really a strong way to go about this as well. I could rant for quite a while here about serotonin, but I know we want to move on to what's next. Which one do you want to go ahead and tackle, Dr. Laura?
Well, I was going to mention about the ADRA2B. So, because you covered dopamine, you covered serotonin, but when we're talking about adrenaline, noradrenaline, this really starts getting into the emotional memory, how the stress signaling that a child has in whatever environment that they're in. And when we're talking about ADRA2B, which is the adrenaline receptor, when you have variants, that's actually has been studied in relationship to emotional memory, attention to emotional cues, and often stronger imprinting of these emotional events. And what that can look like is that they could remember negative events very vividly. And if they have a short version of the 5-HTTLPR that Justin was talking about, that zooming in, zooming out type of thing, that along with some of the other genes can make that imprint even more vivid, paying attention and remembering even more detail, along with having and feeling those emotions. And they have such big emotions at that time that the remembrance of those events, they not only remember the event, they remember the emotion, they remember the details, and it can be overwhelming. So knowing if they have these dysregulations and these particular genes causing them to relive these stresses, to be emotionally steeped in them, then it definitely helps to learn techniques on how they can lower their stress signaling, calm their nervous system, either through breath work, through tapping, through meditation, through counting, or something to help remove them from that situation. So that way they can recenter. And actually, there's a wonderful book called Always Breathe Correctly And that is by Patrick McEwen. And it's fantastic. I mean, not just for central nervous system, regulation, but it's also for oxygen uptake, for improvement of energy, sports ability, regulating asthma, hay fever. There's a lot of really good research, and it's wonderful to the book is actually appropriate for kids 3 through 10 years old, so starting them young, getting them to learn how to breathe is very, very important. Like I said, the younger the better, but even if they are older, okay, getting into that preteen, teenagers, it's never too late to teach them good techniques for nervous system control. Also, you can do things that right after a difficult moment, or they come home, and if you work with them about communication, to be able to talk to you, to be open, non-judgmental, be able to just listen, then they can tell you these things. But you want them, when they tell you, to do like a repair and reframe within that first 24 hours of the event, because you can use that exposure in steps, that how to rework, how to reframe the situation so is not as negatively impactful. So when they do have a remembrance, they are not steeped in all of the emotion and details as negatively or significantly as they may otherwise would be. So it's just a gentle, repeated practice rather than avoidance. You really want to limit that scary imprint, and knowing that they are safe, because that's really what it comes down to is do I feel safe? So I definitely wanted to put that in there, because with mental health and with the stresses that kids go through, because again, big emotions, they don't really know how to regulate it, so everything feels like the end of the world. They need to have that soft spot to land. They need to have that place where they can release and communicate and have someone other than kids their age who don't have any more experience than they do, but having their adults, having the family, having their parents be the one to give them the wisdom of experience, and reframing in a way that to put it in its right place. So
Absolutely. That's such an important gene, like kids that go through trauma. I mean, that's some of them can sort of manage it, and some of them it ends up impacting them a heck of a lot more. And I really think that ADRA2B gene is a strong mover there. Another gene that's really cool to talk about here is the BDNF gene as well, because brain-derived neurotrophic factor is so important for neuroplasticity and how the brain grows and the health of the brain. And by the way, the ability of the brain to recover from any kind of a traumatic event. We talk about this with kids as far as it's also called the concussion gene, because it does help the brain to recover from anything like that. So if you have a kid and you're planning on putting them into some sort of contact sport, or God forbid, a combat sport, which I'm a huge fan of, but stuff where the head is going to be taking some shots, be aware that brain-derived neurotrophic factor is part of what heals the brain, right? So if they're just genetically suboptimal there, which would mean they have the A allele, it really means that the brain is going to have a lot more difficult time reestablishing neuroplasticity if any kind of trauma were to take place there. BDNF, by the way, Dr. Krista did a really great webinar all about BDNF. I believe she actually wrote a thesis on it at one point. She knows crazy details about BDNF. So I encourage you to go back and watch that if you want some really good deep dive on it. But what it really does is it encourages that neuroplasticity. It's like Miracle-Gro for the brain. And when you're suboptimal there, we also find that, interestingly, kids have a little bit of difficulty picking up new skill sets, right? Because it really helps you to be that kind of Jack or Jane of all trades if you have really good BDNF. But what we also find is that the ones that are suboptimal there, like myself, tend to be like subject matter experts. Like there can be like a topic that they just, for whatever reason, they just dove really deep into and they'll just know everything about it. But if they then have to go and learn a new skill that they just don't have the interest in, they're typically the ones that struggle a bit there. And I'm the same way. I've seen that. I could sit here and talk about genes all day, but if I have to go do something that I just have no interest in, it's really hard for me to pay attention and it's hard for me to really sit there and learn it. So that is kind of how BDNF works. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can support it. There's nutritive ways that you can do that with things like lion's mane extract. Things like heat exposure are fantastic if the kid ever wants to climb in the sauna with you. Exercise is great, right? So make sure that they're out there and they're moving their bodies and they're doing what they're supposed to do. That amplifies BDNF. It's part of the reason why exercise makes you feel good, right? Because it gives you that amplification of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Breath work is great. Dr. Laura mentioned breath work. I would love to see more kids getting into that and doing it with their parents as well. So part of the onus, of course, has to be on us as parents, because kids will always fail to listen to you, but they will never fail to emulate you. They're watching and they're thinking about, what does mom and dad do? And they're going to go ahead and do what they see you doing. If you establish high quality routines for yourself from a health perspective, it's way more likely that they're going to do the same thing. There's a reason, folks, why obese parents typically have obese children. There's a reason why fit parents typically have fit children. I mean, it's unfortunate sometimes, but this is how it goes. They're watching and learning, and they're going to emulate you. Don't do the do as I say, not as I do thing. I'm really not a fan of that. I think that you need to be the embodiment of the teaching. If you do breath work in the morning, it's way more likely that your kid's going to say, "What are you doing, mom? What are you doing, dad? Can I try?" And you can do these things with them and turn it into a nice familial bonding moment. And if they're suboptimal for BDNF, those kinds of strategies are really, really good. So exercise, breath work, there's nutritive things that you can do to support their brain function. Get them in the sauna, get them heating their body up and get the detoxification benefits as well. BDNF, the more that you can amplify it, the better they're going to learn and the easier time they're going to have at school when it comes to tests and a lot of these things that are really stressful for them. So BDNF matters a heck of a lot. Don't think it doesn't.
Yeah, and also sunlight, exposing your face, your body, to sunlight first thing in the morning, because, and actually we'll work this in, but a good night's sleep starts in the morning, and the sunlight actually helps to upregulate BDNF. So you get multiple benefits with natural sunlight, also helping to work the circadian rhythm, because we all know kids, how they don't want to go to bed, they don't want to take their naps, they don't want to do this. It's like they're constantly fighting to try to do that, but sleep is so important, that BDNF also works in that, because in sleep, that's where a lot of their memories, their mental processing is happening, and that's when their bodies are also repairing and growing. And I'm sure every single one of you probably has looked at your child and go, "Oh my gosh, did you grow overnight?" It's like all of a sudden, and actually, yes, they can. They do grow. There's so much growth that happens in their sleep. So very, very important, not just in their brain, their bodies, all of that, very, very important. So let's actually dovetail that into talking about some of the genes for sleep. So when we're talking about sleep, you can have your, morning birds, your night owls, of course, like I said, those that just want to fight going to sleep and are just all over the place. But there are a couple of genes in particular. I mean, a lot of the mood and behavior genes that Justin has just gone through so beautifully, impact someone's sleep profile. But the two genes that actually are more specific and have been studied quite robustly for their chronotype, meaning the sleep type, their sleep timing, also appetite timing. And that's the clock gene, which is just like, spelled like the clock that you have on your wall. And that really has been studied in circadian regulation and has been associated in some research with sleep behavior timing and metabolic appetite signaling. Now, what can that look like? That can look like the second wind at night, harder mornings, late appetite, things like that. If there is some dysregulation. So the genes, and we do have the sleep report specifically. So you can actually take a look at that if you do have that in front of you. And the the variant, the dysregulated clock gene would have a C is in cat, allele. The other one is the cry gene, and that's the CRY1. And we have this, it's not showing up in your reports like listed that way, but it's in your gene data. And this is very important. And it's actually one of the new genes that we've added. And there's information about that. And we will be coming out even more that will be shown in your reports, your patient-facing reports for the CRY1 gene. And what this does is it has strong mechanisms linked to delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, or a delay in the sleep, a later sleeper tendency. Okay. And so this can show up in ways where, I can't fall asleep early, even if I'm tired, or they're struggling with early school starts. Although I will tell you, there are several research that has been done in teenagers sleeping more, sleeping late, sleeping much longer. They're not lazy. That is part of their development. And they actually had found when they shifted the start time of school just by 1 hour, it actually helped not only better attendance, increase in grades, decrease in altercations amongst the students themselves, but something they didn't realize that there would be an effect for, there were less car accidents, which was really interesting because a lot of the high schoolers, they drive to school. Well, if they're exhausted and everything else, they end up having more accidents. And that was this serendipitous, byproduct result of this experiment just by changing the opening of school by 1 hour. So, they do need more sleep, but these genes can also affect, underlying their tendency to have that sleep-wake cycle being shifted. So like we spoke earlier about the BDNF gene, what I had mentioned, you need the bright light in the morning, the natural sunlight within that first 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. That helps to reset that circadian rhythm. You want to have them avoid bright lights at night, off their phones, off their computers, the TV, shut it down. I know that can be hard. And, this is where when they're younger, if they have phones, to get into a strict routine where they know what is expected. It's harder to institute rules when they're older and you haven't really been doing it. It's a little bit more difficult on the front end, but definitely worthwhile throughout their future, because the blue light's very stimulating. They're going to have a difficult time going to sleep and an even more difficult time waking up and having their brains work properly. Another thing is to have some gradual schedule shifting. When you have, and what I mean by that, first of all, is that say they've been staying up late and maybe you haven't had the best structure for them, or they haven't kept to a great structure. Well, if you want them to start going to bed earlier, to wake up earlier and get the good night's sleep that they need, don't do something drastic like changing it by a full hour right off the bat. You want to shift timing of their bed, wake up and things like that about 15 minutes every few days. Let their bodies ease into it. And that really is something that can be very helpful, that you work with them, that instead of bitching and complaining and yelling at them to get up and get down to breakfast or whatever the case may be, to help them and support them doing that. Yet we all need to do what we have to do, so totally understand, but doing it in smaller increments definitely helps. And then if there are any issues when it comes to insomnia or other aspects, you may want to look into speaking with a clinician and seeing, what other further guidance for either supplements, medication might be appropriate for them, at least in the interim. So, do you have any other comments? Anything when it comes to sleep?
Yeah, for sure. So the circadian rhythm, I mean, is governed by various hormones, right? I mean, we've got cortisol. People talk about cortisol as if it's something bad. It's absolutely not. It's something that you need. That's what gets you up and gets you going in response to that blue light. In the wintertime, like where I live right now, there's not, the light doesn't come until like 8 in the morning, and that's too late. So you want to actually introduce some blue light in the morning. I mean, I don't love LEDs because there's kind of an imperceptible flicker that exists that can be tough on the eyes. But you can still buy these little gadgets that actually have like higher quality blue light. And that's something that you could turn on in the morning to sort of mimic that environment. And this allows you to sort of auto regulate that circadian rhythm. I know the glasses that all of us biohackers wear are a little odd looking, but you can actually get ones that concentrate the blue light as well. And so you can get ones that you wear in the morning to kind of help your eyes really recognize that there's blue light in the environment, and it kicks off that circadian rhythm. And then as you get into the evening, that's when you would use the red light or the red glasses rather, to make sure that your body isn't suppressing its own melatonin. Understand here that these devices, I'm telling you, it takes under 10 seconds of exposure to blue light in the evening for a lot of your melatonin to be suppressed, because your cortisol goes up. And when cortisol goes up, melatonin goes down, and that's how it works. Cortisol is supposed to peak first thing in the morning and then slowly drop throughout the day and reach its lowest point about 12 hours after you got up. When it reaches its lowest point, that melatonin will rise in response to that. So really regulating these things with light, with exercise timing, etc., all of that is going to really matter. I'm a big fan of horizon gazing as well, if you do live in an area where you can do that. And it's a very simple strategy. It involves just walking outside when the sun comes up, looking into the direction of the horizon when it's a blue-yellow spectrum and there's a low solar angle, and then doing it again in the evening when it's a red-yellow spectrum and again at a low solar angle. These are some of the main indicators for our brain that now it's morning and now it's evening. And if you don't live in an area where you can do that, that's where biohacking, gadgetry, and things come into play. If there's real insomnia and a situation going on there, you're going to want to consider doing cortisol rhythm testing, which is a 4-point cortisol test. It's not the blood test where you do once a day. That's almost worthless. It's not entirely worthless, but it's almost worthless. I'm not a fan of that strategy. 4 times throughout the day, and use saliva, not blood, because you don't want to drive to a clinic 4 times. You want to just spit in a tube and get it looked at. So that's among my strategies for people who have circadian rhythm disruption. There's tons of different webinars that we've done just about sleep. So if there is an issue with your kid in sleep, definitely give those a look, because we went real deep about not only the genes, but actionable strategies as well.
Right. And, I've had several pediatric clients, and, there are some that difficult time going to sleep, difficult time, really fighting that. And we implemented things like the blue light blocker glasses, also PEMF mats. That actually was a big benefit they found, the parents found, having, because I think it's higher dose that has the one that attaches to, that you can slide over a chair that they just sit on. They can sit on that while they're doing their homework, while they're eating dinner or something like that, to help calm the nervous system, to help, with the benefits that it provides. So there are several different strategies. I mean, there are other things that we did, with food, with, parenting techniques and other things. But, there are some great biohacking devices and other tools that can be implemented depending on the situation, on the severity of the current issue. But there's hope. Let's just say that there's hope to get these crazy little chaotic maniacs to go to bed and to do what they need to do. So,
Yeah, and I'll quickly shout out the Apollo Neuro again as well. I mean, I know I bring it up a lot
oh,
on
yes.
webinars, but it's really great because it's got several different settings that you can use to sort of manufacture the state that's desired in that moment. Let's say they have a project due at school and they need to actually sit down and focus on it for a couple hours, where there's a literal focus setting on it. I'm wearing this thing right now. There's a calm setting if they do struggle with that anxiety. I would have loved to have this thing in high school because I was just an anxious person in general. I actually got to a point where I was throwing up daily prior to going to school. I was on antibiotics and there was other stuff going on there too. But the capacity to auto regulate your nervous system by simply clicking a button is fantastic. There's an energy setting that I use in the morning. There's a recovery setting that I use after a workout. There's a unwind setting that I use in the evening. And then there's also a sleep setting, right? So then there's a focus setting. There's a social setting if they have social anxiety. I mean, it's a really useful tool as far as the versatility of it. And I see some people asking in the comments, it is the Apollo Neuro. They have a website, tons of research and studies behind it. And it's a haptic sensation device that you put on your wrist, your ankle, or your chest. And it sits there and it vibrates in such a way that your nervous system sort of responds to it. And it can pull you into these different states without you having to do a heck of a lot of work. And there's no screen associated with it either. And by the way, you can turn it on airplane mode. So they don't have an extra thing kicking Wi-Fi off all over their body. I mean, the Apollo, I think, is as far as versatility and use value, it's one of my favorite things that I own. So I recommend checking it out. And we're not affiliated. I'm just saying that because I use it every day, like 6 times a day.
Wonderful. And that's another thing is, and I'm glad you said that about the airplane mode, because children are very sensitive to EMFs, to dirty electricity, to all of the frequencies that their little bodies that are trying to grow are being bombarded with. So one of the things that you'll want to do is to lessen that load. Turn off your Wi-Fi at night. It's a good reason, in a good way for them to not be scrolling on their phones, especially if they're a little older, in the night, because, hey, guess what? There's no Wi-Fi to be had. So they're not going to be connecting to the internet, to shut down things. Also, look where their bed is located. Are there a lot of electrical, cords, or is there the router or Wi-Fi box close to near where their bed is? If it is, move it further away. Distance is your friend when it comes to EMFs and those types of frequencies and energy. So definitely protect your children. There are also devices that can be used. Things like, oh goodness,
Leela Quantum.
yeah, is one. Vivo Base. There's a lot of different things. Just, I would say, do your homework. We actually have spoken about some of these products before in some of our other webinars, but look into them. See what kind of scientific research, not just some fly by night stating, oh, hey, we'll block EMFs. Take a look. There's also a wonderful gentleman who was actually the first gentleman that I had interviewed on the DNA Talks podcast, called Nick Pineau. He's called the EMF guy, and he's got wonderful information when it comes to EMF exposure, where it's located, what you can do, clothing, all of this kind of stuff. So definitely take a look. You can just Google the EMF guy, and he has a podcast, but that's very impactful to those little bodies. So putting that out there.
Yeah, and this is a really important part of what I said in the very beginning about creating the ideal epigenetic environment, right? That's what you guys have control over at home with your kids. And honestly, be the parent who does these proactive things, right? Be the one who gets high quality air filters and understands that your kid is breathing 20,000 times a day in your home. Be the one who takes these steps for Wi-Fi. Be the one who gets rid of the microwave, even though it's convenient. Try to encourage them to eat clean food, real food, cook in stainless steel or cast iron. Don't do the plastic and the Teflon, right? These little epigenetic signals into their body will accumulate, right? And the control that we have over just giving the highest quality epigenetic signals possible, that's what we have to do. You have their genes on hand if you've worked with us before, and then you can control the epigenetic environment. And the marriage of those two is what sets you up for success. You know, we should talk a little bit about food here as well, Dr. Laura,
I
because
was just going to say,
right, I mean,
absolutely.
they
Yeah,
eat what
because,
you give them.
and I'll tell you, kids, you love them, but you also want to just squeeze them sometimes. And when it comes to food and dinner time, you just never know what you're going to end up sitting down at the table with. Because I'll tell you, my little toddler granddaughter can be the pickiest little eater. It's like some days she'll love avocados and salmon or, steak or whatever else. And other days, all she wants, mac and cheese. It's like, what is going on with this girl? And the thing is that when we're talking about appetite, satiety, because sometimes, again, she loves bacon and she would eat an entire pack of bacon if we let her. So I mean, honestly, that's actually pretty good as long as it's good quality. But when you start looking at a satiety or weight risk wiring, this is important to understand in your child. I mean, granted, yes, they're growing and they need a lot of, food for the energy to grow, but it can be insights into their eating habits, into what they're eating, how they're eating, and what that could look like as they get older, start going through those hormonal changes and start becoming adults. And we want to make sure to set up a good foundation of good habits so that way we can help them work with their genes, not against it. And there are a few genes, actually, there are several in our diet and nutrition report that is very informative in the impact of their appetite, of their satiety, of their weight risk wiring. So FTO is one of the main genes. This really works in appetite signaling, that sometimes a loss of control, eating risk as they get older. And in kids, when you have a risk allele for the FTO gene, so we're talking if they have an A allele, T is an optimal allele, but the A allele, there can be a bit of a risk, and it has been associated with higher energy intake, of that food, and eating more, not having that satiety, that never feeling full. Of course, that's pretty much every teenage boy, where they have frequent snacking or a preference for very energy dense foods. Again, they may be able to get away with that younger, but it will catch up to them as they get older. So good habits, that knowledge and good habits will help set the stage for them in how to do that. So one thing, protein, high, and this is with all of the food, high quality foods. yes, going organic as much as you can in what you can afford, making sure your protein sources are good, low toxins in them, or preferably no toxins, but but having protein and fiber at breakfast. Breakfast should not be pastry and cereals and these sugary, junk. That's just setting them up for a crash. And then we wonder why they need snacks. They eat before they go to school. And then as soon as they get to school, they have a snack. And then 2 hours later, they have another snack. And then they have another. And it's just like they don't need it like that, this constant up and down crashing. Because I used to be a teacher. I was a certified teacher and taught, elementary school, middle school, high school. So I've seen it. I've been there. I see the snacks that they give when, oh, it's snack time and they have Cheez-Its and, all of these other things. It's like, it just gives them these major sugar rushes. And then we wonder why they can't pay attention. So really push for that protein and fiber, plan the snacks that they have, keep the ultra processed, hyper palatable foods less available. I mean, every once in a while, yes, they're going to go over to a friend's house, they're going to go to a birthday party, have a piece of cake or whatever, but don't have that as a mainstay in your home. And really protect the sleep, because sleep loss amplifies those appetite hormones. So, what other gene do you want to talk about when we talk about in our diet and nutrition report?
Yes, so there's so many that matter, right? And I also think a good point here is that as far as what you are choosing to feed them, the younger you are, I mean, it's really important to start introducing things that are going to contribute to alpha diversity in the gut. Like there's diets that I think can be really useful later on in life, like the restrictive diets, like an autoimmune paleo or even a carnivore. I mean, I've seen people that are adults do pretty well on those kinds of things. But when you're a kid, unless you have a real reason to put them on a restrictive diet, I think that is the time to be introducing these different types of spices and veggies and different meats and stuff like that, because what we don't want is for them to be older and have it be like this foreign thing that they all of a sudden introduce. Like, I don't think that it's a good idea to do a carnivore diet on a really young person unless they absolutely have to because of an autoimmune condition or something like that. I think that we want to actually introduce things that their palate is going to go, oh, I do like that, or no, I don't like that, and have the microbes that exist in their gut kind of get used to different things coming in, different micronutrient sources and things like that. So, stir fries and just the things that you can really incorporate a lot of variety into, different fermented foods, etc. I think that sets them up for success with regard to a gut health strategy. The gene I definitely think we should touch on is something that mac and cheese is probably one of the worst case scenarios for. It would be the TCF7L2 gene, right? When you get something that's both high in starches and fats, and a lot of that is saturated fat as well, very, very energy dense, that's going to kick off a heck of an insulin response. But I'll tell you, if they're suboptimal for this TCF7L2 gene, which is a master regulator of the insulin mechanism, they're going to have a 1.5 times greater insulin response all the time when it gets kicked off because of macronutrient intake. And, childhood obesity, it's a tragedy. It's really awful to see. And I think that a lot of people do have just a baseline dysregulation in this insulin and blood sugar mechanism. When it's like that, you have to be really aware of the types of macronutrients and the volume of macronutrients that you're giving your children. Too many starches, especially if they're suboptimal for the AMY1 gene on top of that, their blood sugar is going to be going up and down all day. And that's, we see it all the time. Pre-diabetics, it's because they have suboptimal genes. And then the epigenetic information that they gave their body kicked it into high gear. Food is epigenetics, right? It's something we provide. It's information that we use and the metabolism understands it. When we give the wrong information consistently, or just too much information consistently, your body is going to start to react to that, and your metabolism is going to start to react to that. TCF7L2 is really a master regulator of insulin. And if you're suboptimal and you eat too many starches or even too much fats, it's going to make it so that you're really exposing them to have those kinds of insulinogenic problems later on in life. So management of blood sugar, right? You can use Ceylon cinnamon. Kids love cinnamon. You can put it in different stuff. Things like apple cider vinegar are great as a little salad dressing, things that help dispose of the blood glucose. I'm a big fan of postprandial exercise as well. Like after they eat, don't just eat and then sit down on the couch. Eat and then do a little activity, right? That really helps to dispose of that blood glucose because it shunts it into the muscle tissue. So management of that whole mechanism is really important for preventing childhood obesity and also the just blood sugar dysregulation issues, which can really help or hurt rather their health long term. I think that blood sugar is one of the most important metrics to look at. So look at that TCF7L2. If they're suboptimal there, really make sure that you're controlling that macronutrient intake. Very important for health and longevity.
Wonderful. And, I'll tell you that type 2 diabetes used to be known as adult onset diabetes. That's not the case anymore. It really, we are seeing it younger and younger and younger. And, there are actually fairly simple ways, to help offset that, and knowing their genes being one of them. And I'm sure that plenty of you are going, yeah, but in reality, how do I get my kids to eat these things? They are so picky. And I'm telling you, I know what you mean. Like I said, my my granddaughter, like, she's going to be 3 in March, and she can be so darn picky. But it's the consistency of what you do. We never fed her baby food. We made all of her baby food. I mean, her brother is going to be a year old in January. And she went straight from breastfeeding and, started introducing real foods, but we blend it ourselves. And they would eat what we eat. We put on their plate what we eat. And that's what we still do. It's, even if you just give a sampling of all the different things. Now, granted, there have been plenty of nights she'll look at it and go, yuck. And it'll end up in the dog dish. But it's that exposure and the expectation going, this is what we're all eating. This is what you have. So another thing is that you can try, because we found this out too, that we would have food on her plate, same stuff that we have, but yet, if it comes off of mommy's plate or if it comes off of Anna's plate, she'll eat it. It's the same food, but she'll eat it because it's ours. So even if you have your child sitting next to you, and this works better, obviously, with the younger ones, and you have your plate and you just kind of, nonchalantly just kind of share it with them, they're more likely to have that and to eat those types of foods, but expose them to the foods that you are eating. And their palates are malleable. Okay, they will change and they're going to learn. And some days they'll eat something and they'll love it. Other days they'll be like, and they'll go for something else. But constantly expose them to real foods and not filling them up with a lot of junk. And another thing for those of you with, toddlers or preschoolers, don't give them a lot of milk, especially around the times close to meals, because that will fill them up. And if you shouldn't be feeding them like skim milk or half milk. I'm going to give them milk, give them whole fat milk, but that milk is going to fill them up. But it's also something that you can take a look to see about sensitivities, to see, what might be happening for them, because they could have some reaction. So, it's quite nuanced, but this is where working with someone as well, having a navigation call, with our Healthy Kids coupon, you get 20% off your DNA 360, or for them, a DNA 360 kit, report, and a navigation call, which means that a practitioner like myself, Justin, will go through the report, will give you insights specific for your child. So we do have that 20% off until December 19th. So make sure you grab that while it's still available. Another thing that I wanted to comment on that you had mentioned, the postprandial exercise. This is absolutely fantastic. And I will tell you that it also is good for their nervous system to kind of calm them down, burn off some of that excess energy before they go to bed. So they actually do go to bed. One thing that we love to do is we'll pillow fight. Or, we'll have them jump off the couch into some pillows and, kind of put a pillow over their bodies and just kind of like do some squish. That pressure, obviously not too heavy, but that pressure actually helps to calm the nervous system. It's really neat. There's a bunch of studies on this through neuroscience, which actually happens to be one of my specialties. But that's something that you can do. Do it through play. Have them, get out their rambunctiousness, tire them out, and then they can be more calm, a little bit more workable to do their regular routine. And that works into another aspect, is having a good repetitive routine for night, making sure lights are dimmed. Remember what we talked about, those, the blue lights. You want to have that calm down, to have the rooms a little bit cooler, to have that structure is extremely helpful when it comes to the expectations and knowing, okay, body, it's time for bed. And then, of course, for the younger ones, reading the books. Another thing that actually has been pretty amazing that you can do for those pre-kindergarten, the ones that can have a little bit better speech. But even then, I mean, my granddaughter at 2.5, she babbles and tells stories with all the words that she knows, is actually walking through the day with them to start winding them down. To have them, first you start off talking about the day together and the different things that you have done, walking through, having them feed in information. This works with their brain in how they remember, how they solidify memories and construction and ideas and processing and reframing. And you can do that almost in a storytelling fashion and work it all the way until they come to the end of the story of bedtime. That actually was something fairly new that I had learned about and started doing with my granddaughter, which was really amazing. So again, great techniques, great things, explore, continue to learn. So that way you can help your child be the best that they can be. So Justin, do you have any other comments before we jump into Q&A?
I do. Let me give one of the best pieces of health advice I ever received and that I've ever given as well, because this was a real game changer for me. So when it comes to these hyper palatable foods, I recommend really trying to find alternatives for each and every one that your kid enjoys, and for yourself as well. Like even with mac and cheese. Okay, so let's just use that as an example, because pretty universally that's one of the best tasting foods possible. Right? Let's just be honest. But if we have control over the ingredients, well, we can influence it, right? We can make it a little bit better for the gut, more nourishing, that kind of a thing. So if you were to take a typical mac and cheese and then say, well, let's substitute the pasta for rice pasta, right? There's different types that you can get. I use this rice pasta that's just an organic white rice that they turned into a pasta. And if you cook it and cool it, it turns it from a normal starch into a resistant starch. Well, resistant starch is way lower glycemic. It's also going to act as like a prebiotic fiber. So it kind of lines the intestines instead of just going in and spiking the blood sugar. And by the way, a lot of people don't know this, but once you've turned it resistant, if you heat it up again, it stays mostly resistant. Like it doesn't turn back into a normal starch. So a little bit of additional preparation time, cook it, cool it, turn it resistant, and then you can heat it back up for the family thereafter. And it's still going to operate way better for the gut. Less blood sugar fluctuation there, and it's also more of a prebiotic fiber. So it's actually serving their digestion in that way. And then maybe you use a lactose-free grass-fed cheese, and maybe you sneak some veggies and some spices in there and put some high quality sea salts in there. Well, now it's got minerals in there. You know what I mean? We can take some of these really just not so good for you meals and just find little swaps, little alternatives. I use like cassava flour wraps instead of the wheat-based wraps. You can find popcorn that's grass-fed ghee and sea salt, and it's air popped instead of popped in the seed oils and all the bull crap, and it's not microwaved either. So go through your cabinet. This is my advice.
Oh, yeah. So as you were saying, like go through your cabinets, see what
Yeah.
you have, and make sure your ingredients are clean, that they're non-inflammatory, that they're not going to be spiking their blood sugar. Thankfully, there are a lot of companies that have put out healthier fare. One thing that my granddaughter, the kids love, are beef sticks. There are good, healthy beef sticks, cheese sticks, things that can be quick and easy for those snacks, but much healthier. So definitely check that out. Look for organic, but again, try not to lean in on super processed or highly processed things. I mean, even organic, even healthier fare can still be more highly processed, which again, periodically can be good. But have the main focus of your meals be whole food, okay? Much lower or less processed. Also, another thing that's really important when it comes to the nutrients. In the diet nutrition report, we actually look at micronutrients, specifically things like vitamin A conversion with the BCM01 gene. We look at C, that transport, how well are they, being able to utilize the vitamin C that they take in. We're looking at zinc transport with the SLC30A8 gene. By the way, the vitamin C gene is SLC23A1. We also look at the vitamin E, which actually you won't really see, but it's in the gene data download that you can get from that text file. So looking at these, you can see where your child might need a little extra support on these particular micronutrients and where you might to lean in a little bit more on foods that are in the right form. For example, for the BCM01 gene for vitamin A, you, yes, still give them vegetables. So this is the beta carotene, vitamin A from vegetables, but we can't utilize that. Our bodies have to use the enzyme from that gene to convert it to retinol, which is the form of vitamin A that we actually utilize. Well, some people don't convert that very well. So they're not going to get the appropriate amounts of vitamin A just from vegetables. They need to have some sort of animal proteins because animals have converted it for us. So leaning in on those types of foods where they may have a genetic predisposition of lower bioavailability, transport, absorption, or what have you. So you can look at that. And if you have super picky kids that are just not eating and you're wondering how they're even still alive, you can also look into supplements. Depending on the age, you can actually get powders. You can get liquid supplements. You can get patches, actually transdermal vitamin just even for kids, they are available. If in powder form, you can actually, my daughter-in-law actually found one that was wonderful, organic, based for the little toddler that we have, because again, sometimes I wonder how she can function because she just is so picky, she barely eats. And we want to make sure that she has her nutrients. So the one thing with the powders is that you have to mix it in something and they have to eat it. And if they're not eating, then how do you get it inside them? Well, yeah, that can be a problem. You can mix things in smoothies. Try creative ways on things that that they like. Like my granddaughter loves fruit smoothies whenever I make those. So, I'll throw in some arugula or spinach or some greens in there and kind of blend it in a little bit. And then we'll also put in, a vitamin powder to make sure that she gets those nutrients. If she's not so in the mood for that, some of those transdermal vitamin patches, granted, they really are more so for children starting at age 3 and up. But if your child, and I saw in the chat that, some people have, 5-year-olds and so on and so forth. And the pediatric clients that I worked with, the youngest one I had was a 5-year-old. And we needed to get some good nutrients in her. And that did work well. When she wasn't so keen on the powder supplement, having that transdermal was a real lifesaver. So there are options. It's just being aware of them, and also research to know, if this is actually, something that works for you, works for your child. But I would say any doing supplements, please work with a practitioner. Make sure that is something that can work for you. And I just wanted to apologize on behalf of my co-host, Justin. His Zoom crashed, and unfortunately he cannot get back in. So you're for the last part of this webinar. And so I'll take this moment to finish to go over the question and answers. And please, if you do have any other question and answers, because we do have a few that came in, please put them in there and I can get them answered for you. All right, so let's shift over. And the first question comes from Sheila. And Sheila's asking, she said, well, first she said, my son is 5 years old on the spectrum. What do you recommend for picky eating and expanding his food choices? Now, obviously, this is a very important question and very common. I have made some comments on this already, but when it can be a little bit more challenging when you have a child on the spectrum. And it's something that we really want to look at, this developmentally appropriateness, especially in a neurobiological way, not just just try harder type of approach, because a lot of times, that doesn't work. So first, you really want to try to reframe what's happening. And this really lowers everyone's stress level, because many autistic children, it's not that they're picky per se, they're just protective eaters, because their brain is asking, is this predictable? Is it safe? Does it feel the same every time? And when the nervous system perceives a threat, like a new texture, a smell, a temperature, a color, their appetite can shut down. And that's biology, not behavior. So really, your goal is expansion, not replacement. Because oftentimes when a food is associated with something familiar that they enjoy, then they are a bit more set in that safety zone to be able to branch out and try something else. But before any food strategies can work, that parasympathetic nervous system has to be online. And to do this, do the thing I mentioned earlier, like eating together, even if he eats different foods, You don't want any pressure, no bribing, no bargaining or one bite rules. You want to present things, talk to him in a calm voice, predictable routine. Okay, for example, like the same seat, the same plate if he has a preference. And also keep the meals short, about like 15 to 20 minutes. So, because when we're talking about pressure, if he feels a lot of pressure, that can increase cortisol and it can shut down digestion. And when you're talking about the safety, if he feels safe, then that activates the vagal tone and also activates curiosity. The next thing that you want to do is approach a food chaining method. And this really is the best evidence, for a type of approach. And how that would work is, for example, if he eats, say, like chicken strips or something like that, you want to have the same brand, or if it's baked instead of fried, homemade nuggets with the same shape, chicken strips or shredded chicken mixed into rice, kind of what Justin was talking about, of choosing or shifting some of the ingredients and the things that you're doing, but that's very similar to what they're used to. If he eats crackers, okay, you want the same cracker but maybe a different shape, or a cracker with a thin spread or toaster bread, or, just only change one variable at a time. All right. Whether it be texture or flavor or shape, but never all three at the same time. Otherwise, overload. So that can really, work. Another thing would be work with sensory preferences, not against them. So for most autistic kids, they have a dominant sensory preference. So this would be, for example, crunchy. Okay, if they have a dominant preference, then you want to offer more like freeze-dried fruits, crackers, snap peas. If there's a preference for smooth, then go for yogurts, smoothies, purees. Or if they have a temperature preference, then work toward that. So really it's hiding the nutrition in these preferences, and also using micro exposures instead of full on. So eating is not the first step. The exposure is and leading into it. And I know I've took more time about this, but these steps can be very useful for any type of child at any age. So it just really helps. And also getting their input, again, depending on the age, for the types of things, like giving them, offering choices, but letting them choose from those healthy choices that you provide. So that's a good place to start. All right. So our next question is also from Sheila. And she's saying, all of my son's mood and behavior genes are suboptimal. Emotional regulation and frustration are things he struggles with. What can we do to help with frustration? There's a lot of things that you can do, but I would highly encourage, especially with your son's situation being on the spectrum, to contact us and get a program or have some sessions so we can dive a little bit deeper, because something like this is a bit more nuanced than just saying, oh, hey, my son's genes are suboptimal, because there's information in particular which genes, even if all of them, but there could be some that are related that might be of strengths or ways that we could go about doing it. But, that really starts into medical advice. And I want to make sure that we stay within our scope within this webinar, but that your son would get the precise help that he would need. So I do recommend you reach out, and Vanny can put the link in the chat so you can get in touch with someone to see what might work for you. All right, so our next question let's see, is from Carly. She's saying, this is so interesting to me. I'm so glad to hear that. She said, have you ever supported an entire family with them all getting DNA tests and seeing similarities and differences with each person's needs and being a part of the whole family's healing? And what was the breathing book called? Okay, so the breathing book was called Always Breathe Correctly by Patrick McEwen. And yes, I have worked with entire families. Actually, a few of them where it was mother, father, son, daughter. In a couple of cases, the children were teenagers. Actually, one was 12, she was a preteen, and the son was 16. And in another family, the daughter was 5 and the son was 10. And actually, with another family, I just did one daughter. We didn't do the other daughter, but I had the father and the grandfather. So it was really interesting to see the patterns, but also working with them as a unit, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of each to be able for each of them to understand and support one another and have it be more as a cohesive family unit of understanding. And it was actually, I found, to be much more helpful because they each helped one another and worked with one another for that support, even the siblings. So it was really wonderful. Thank you for asking that. Great question. All right, our next question is from Amy, and she's asking if child has a suboptimal genes for D, A, and zinc. Wait, okay, if a child has suboptimal genes for vitamin D, A, and zinc, is it sufficient to simply encourage food, or is it imperative to provide oral supplementation to prevent disease expression later on in life? Okay, and she says her son happens to be 7. And Amy, that is a fantastic question, but the answer is nuanced because, at 7, this is exactly the window where genetic risk can be buffered rather than expressed. And yes, you do want to have and to lean in on food first. Is food alone enough? Maybe not. It might not be sufficient enough with children having those genetic variants. But again, it also depends on the severity of that variant. Are they heterozygous, meaning that the letters are different, or are they homozygous suboptimal, where they have both alleles are the same and they are of the suboptimal? And then there's also the fact of what are they actually presenting? And this can be in symptomology, this can be in blood work, but you want to test, not guess. So you definitely want to take a look before you start really diving into supplementation. What exactly do they need? Because you could say their vitamin D pathway is dysregulated, but they're eating enough, vitamin D foods, they're getting enough sun. They might even, you might even be giving them a little bit of vitamin D drops. I mean, I know that I give, my son, daughter-in-law, and myself, we give the grandchildren some vitamin D drops because they have some dysregulation in their pathways. But we give them just a small amount. So it's not saying that you can't, because also depending on what latitude do you live at? Do you live in the Northeast, where there's not a whole lot of sun and it's cold most of the year, in which case, even someone who has good optimal vitamin D pathways, they're not getting enough of the sun to get that natural vitamin D. So you want to see where the levels are. But a little bit is not going to be an issue. And this is where you could also talk to your pediatrician. But in that case, supplementation is good, but definitely work with someone if you are going to be introducing supplementation. Again, the test, don't guess. All right. And let's see. Our last question is from Megan. And she's asking, what genes do we need to look at tied to oxidative stress with exercise? So she has 4 kids, God bless you, 5, 7, 9, and 11. And they love cross country and adventure racing, but they're also suboptimal for the SOD2. Yeah, SOD2 is a major antioxidation pathway, and that's for the mitochondria. So it actually stands for superoxide dismutase. And what that does is it takes these oxidants that are byproducts of the oxidation process of the mitochondria, and it needs to break that down and get rid of it. It breaks it down into hydrogen peroxide and oxygen. And then it transfers it over to GPX. And you'll find this in the anti-inflammatory profile system in your DNA 360 reports. And it's in a sub report called antioxidation. So when you look at that, now you also had asked about any ideas on how to improve their detox to help them recover, to allow them to do what they love to do but not hurt themselves. And it really is such an excellent question, and honestly a very wise one. And you're doing exactly what genetics is meant for, supporting that capacity without limiting the joy. So really just a short reassurance though, is that SOD2, just having, a TT or a CT or the combination with the GPX doesn't mean that your kids shouldn't do endurance sports, okay? It means that their mitochondria create more oxidative stress during aerobic exercise, need better recovery support than average kids. So, really what you want to do is you want to look at different aspects to support that, where you're talking about, food. So foods, antioxidants, which kind of seems, rather obvious. So you're looking at your vitamin C's, you're looking at your vitamin A's, and vitamin D also helps in there. I know I wouldn't necessarily go to supplements right away. This is where what I had mentioned earlier with the test don't guess, but maybe with the older kids, they might be able to take some of the supplements probably a little bit more readily for glutathione conjugation pathway, depending on how that is, supports in that respect. You definitely want to make sure that there is protein. This is an easy thing that steps outside of supplements, but making sure protein is immediately available after exercise, like within that 30 to 60 minutes, because that supports the glutathione synthesis and muscle repair. So for example, eggs, Greek yogurt, collagen, protein blends, smoothies with protein, the beef sticks, these types of things to give them that repair. Magnesium, very, very important. This supports mitochondrial enzymes, reduces muscle tension, calms the nervous system, and different forms that are usually really good for kids is magnesium glycinate, even magnesium threonate, but in lower doses because it's really good for the brain. Also electrolytes. You want to make sure that they have the electrolytes, especially sodium and potassium, because oxidative stress increases dehydration. So you want to make sure they're rehydrated, but with those electrolytes, and avoid sugar heavy sports drinks, or those the other energy drinks. Do something more pure. Element, LMNT, is a wonderful electrolyte kits that you can pour in. They have fantastic flavors. Also, Redmond's Real Salt. They have a line called Relight, which is their electrolytes. And Redmond's Real Salt is fantastic because the salt itself actually has trace minerals in it to help, give them those building blocks. So, again, really target the antioxidant support that I already talked about. Look into foods, also vitamin E, food-based foods, sunflower seeds, almonds, avocados, selenium, only if their intake is low, but Brazil nuts are fantastic. So if they have, a couple nuts, Brazil nuts, that's all they'll need, for the selenium. And then just making sure that they are, getting a well-rounded foods, get their dark leafy greens, salads, folates, things like that. Even like I said, how I threw it into my granddaughter's smoothie, sneak it in there if you have to. So, and just making sure that, they're getting good night's sleep. That's really the way to do it. So I hope that has given you enough information to work with. And with that, I will say, thank you, everyone. We've really enjoyed you, coming here, spending your time with us, and hopefully learning a little bit more about how genes can affect, or the information can actually enhance your on how to raise healthy kids that thrive. So until the next time, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great night.